All right, we're live. Uh, Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. This is our second, third. Anyway, it's one of our summer shows, and we are very blessed and fortunate tonight to have an incredible artist, one of my favorites, an artist that has been working in mainstream comics and in design, video games, all over the place, storyboarding even, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Storyboarding too.
Yeah,
Yeah, all
absolutely.
over. Um, and he has an incredibly realistic style when he wants to, very exaggerated when he wants to, and very dynamic, really all the time. And I've been a huge fan for ages. So when he agreed to do the show, I wanted to schedule it as quickly as we could. We are thrilled to have ERIC CANETE.
Hello. Thank you for having me, David. Thank you, Eric.
So yeah, tonight, I'm going to switch my camera. So you're looking at me right now. This will take me. There's a button for this that you can. I'm no good with this stuff, so it is what it is. But here we go. Okay, so here's
Yep.
my desk, and so you can already see Erick Grove. Oh, by the way, let me also introduce. I do this every time, and I'm so sorry, Eric. Every time I forget to introduce our co-host, Erick Grove, who also has his drawing. And so we drew these first, and ERIC CANETE actually has not started. These are Deadpool. I kept it very, very loose. And what we're going to do is based on ERIC CANETE's I say notes, but we're going to be talking, and he's going to be leading us through making this more dynamic and really pushing the exaggeration, something that I never do. So I'm really, really thrilled to start. And Eric, you're also working on tone paper. So I've got a sheet of tone paper. I'm going to be redrawing this along with you and
Right on.
the question. So here we go. All right.
Let's do it. Should I switch cameras as well? Yes, that's the ideal.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, here we go. If I know what buttons to press and I don't break anything. 1, 2, 3. Brilliant.
Great. All right, okay. So let me give you the screen here. So what are we looking at so far?
Okay, so I think it's an opportunity for me to sort of explain what exaggeration means to me, especially when it comes to anatomy, right? I often think of like the very fundamental basic principles of, like, you think of a thigh as a tube, you think of a forearm as a cylinder, and so on and so forth, right? So I think what I have a tendency to think about when it comes to how I push my anatomy is assuming that it's a balloon that is only about 80% filled with liquid or fluid, right? And it reacts based on the momentum or intent of the action. And so that momentum, that intent, has the displacement of that fluid go into that part of the volume of the thigh or on the cylinder of the arm. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's how I think of how I push when pieces of anatomy start to, like, distort or deform. And so, so we can get started. I think I took a pretty decent snapshot of what you guys were doing, but forgive me if I don't remember.
All right,
yours was like...
Quickly show all you guys again. Let me just...
Yes, please. Just so I can take a snapshot from my head. There it is.
Looks so like here's mine, and Eric, we can't see yours right now. You've got paper over.
Sorry.
Very quickly, I'm going to look at what you both are doing and just do the quick sketch of.
And I'll leave all three up while you're doing this part, just so. And it looks like it's going very, very fast.
Yeah, I'll try not to linger for too long. Like I said, I just want to take as much of the basic information as I can. Here we go.
I feel like we're feeling it already looks very dynamic.
I think this is right. Oh, right. It's got a thing that goes to the back here. Oh, wait. This thing is favoring, right?
Yeah.
This right shoulder or left shoulder is favoring. And he's kind of taking a step forward. Okay, great.
Okay.
That's wonderful. I'm going to pull this piece of paper over to the side just so I have it as a point of reference. And then start over. And hopefully, I think the target of this camera is like right here. No? Yeah. Okay, let's start with David's really quick. I'll bring the original piece of paper back into view. So there's a couple things that I always see, and I think this is an answer, not necessarily to the issue that you're having, either Dave or Eric. I think it's just generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to how to make something a tiny bit more dynamic, and my wife makes fun of me all the time because she's like, I know your formula. You know, you always have like the big leg coming towards camera and the opposite leg receding so far away it turns into like a malnourished like ligament, you know. And she's you know, tongue cheekly, she's very right. One of the things that I try to do, and this is where the volume concept comes in, right? So I said, like, imagine if this volume that's representative of the left thigh of this Deadpool, right, is a cylinder, like so. But the thing that's the thing that's informing on where the displacement of that volume is the momentum of him taking a step forward this way. So that volume would then displace to the front part of the cylinder, correct?
It makes sense.
That
Yeah,
makes sense,
you should to the front.
right?
So it would be, I like that you describe it as a liquid too, because I can imagine it sloshing forward. You know.
Exactly. And that for me is where the exaggeration happens. Suddenly, the nature of this very squishy tube, this very squishy cylinder, imagine it again like a transparent balloon, right? The nature of that displacement would then stretch this entire volume, right? Which then would give it would pinch here closer to the hip area, and then bulge here away from the closer to the knee. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Yeah.
Right? And then everything starts pushing in that direction. So imagine if that volume impacts the volume that is the knee, right? Which is let's represent it as a bubble this time around, right? So that knee now stretches forward, right? Because the volume in there is being displaced. Yes? And then because of the momentum of his movement moving this way, right? The volume that represents the thigh, right? All of that suddenly drops down towards the foot because that's towards the bottom part of the foot or towards the ankle, right? Because think about the momentum kind of like sloshing this way.
Okay.
And then that's what for me anyway, that's what allows for the weight to displace on this slab of, what is it? Is it debris, you would say, David?
I was thinking like a
on?
big piece of, is it rebar? You know, the
Sure.
metal.
Sure.
It really doesn't matter though. It could be
Right,
anything.
but it's almost like an immovable object, right? It has very little give to it. So
Yes.
then the volume would then the momentum, the sort of the energy would then squash into this immovable weight. So similar to if you're looking at a wall and a hand is about to touch it like so, right? Here's the side of the palm, right? Here's the pinky here, here's the forefinger, and then here's the thumb. Once it makes contact with that wall, right? The volume of the hand displaces so it becomes flat against that wall. Right? That's the same principle as what would happen to this foot. Whereas it would typically have your sort of like foot anatomy. Right? Here's the big toe, here's the little toe, right? And there's the arch of the foot. All of that would just compact onto the rebar or onto the debris that you're talking about. And that's what really helps you sell the fact that it's settling into a space. Does that make sense?
It really does. Yeah. Just
Right.
overall, the idea of altering the shape of something based on its direction and weight shift, totally foreign to me. This is very interesting.
It's an animation trick, right? So that's the reason why, if you take a look at the way Bruce Timm has built out Justice League Unlimited or Batman the Animated Series or Superman Adventures, that's why he has this, and it's an animator's trick, right? That's why he has this principle of, you know, if he's drawing an arm, he draws like the curve on this side, and then the you know, and then this side will be straight, right? And then there's the fist. So it's a very easy concept to wrap your mind around, because what it has a tendency to do is that it allows you to really be deliberate about where your line of action is, right? So if a person is sort of like stepping forward as you would have it, right? At least in the style that I implement, most of this stuff at the under portion of the thigh would suddenly become very featureless, right? Because I want to sell the fact that this volume is displacing in such a way, and this straight line really does help that the communication of momentum and movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start drawing. Oops. Here we go.
Are you using is it a red ballpoint pen that you're using to sketch?
No, this is a mechanical pencil with red lead loaded into it, and it is so finicky. So if you hear it break multiple times during stream, please forgive me, because I can bear down pretty heavily on something, and it does not have much constitution at all, so it'll break if I just bear down on it just the perfect way. All right, I'm going to have your drawing sitting off to the side. That way I'll kind of remember the pose that you're going for. So,
can I quickly interrupt? I apologize, but I really want to show you this.
Yes.
Okay. So that's where I am right now, and I've done the leg, and that is my attempt to do. And already I can really feel it pushing out that way. It has an effect that I've never really achieved just doing that. So anyway, I'm very excited. So.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's not to say that its limitation is the style that you implement. Like, people always say, well, it's a Bruce Timm, and I don't draw like Bruce Timm. It's not that. You don't have to like reach into the Bruce Timm bag of tricks. What you're doing is just understanding the fundamental nature of how it works, right? And so you build rendering, hopefully, to complement that movement. Okay, this is tough for me to try to recreate that drawing, so forgive me.
And I wouldn't worry, Eric, about being too faithful to it. Ultimately, we're really here for the way that you draw. So
Oh, right on. So I can take a pass at what I'm looking at thus far, and I think, as a matter of fact, it might be sort of fruitless, because you're going to end up doing it over your drawing. So what I can do is take a pass of how I would do this pose. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. I'm going to start over. And by the way, back in the day, when I streamed, I would start over on a piece. I would have to say, and like, live, I would start over on a piece easily 4 or 5 times. and I wasn't too precious about that starting over either, Only because I think, I don't know, when I was much younger, I would get so attached to, like, oh, it's going so well so far, let's say 60% of the way, and then somehow I mess up and I feel like, oh geez, all that 60% is now, is now, the point of that is all gone, right? And I don't know, these days I am not very precious about the drawing, so I am happy to start over, implementing everything that I'd learned from the previous version, from the previous iteration.
I don't do that, I have to say, and I really should, because I'll fight with the same drawing until the paper is just gray, and you know how it starts.
Really? What is that, you think? Is it do you think it's like a time management thing? Do you believe, like, oh, you've spent so much time, and
no, it's
is
not
it more of a stubbornness?
It's a stubbornness thing. Also, most artists will, and I see a lot of artists that use like a 2H lead for detail, and then they'll use like an HB or something even softer to fill in some larger areas. I don't do that. I use the same pencil, and there's like nothing. It's like a mental block, and I think I get that way when I'm drawing. I'm just determined to make it work until it truly, absolutely doesn't, and I've lost days.
Where's that cutoff point for you? Where do you see yourself when you go like, okay, that's enough? Is it when the paper finally gives and you just can't draw it anymore, or is it something else?
It can be when the paper gives, and that's, fortunately, it's not too often. But usually it's when I've put a lot of detail and a lot of work, because I'll do that too, into a part of the picture, and I realize that another part of the picture just can't possibly work with what I already have. And trying to erase, once you put detail in, it gets really difficult to fix. So at that point, I'll let it go.
Is there like, have you planned throughout that image at all? Or are you more like, this feels good right here, and I'm kind of building on top of this stuff that's successful, and that's how it catches you by surprise?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's always a result of no planning. I do plan covers. I have no choice, because editors want to see. By the way, I'm erasing mine right now to follow what you're doing.
Sure.
Editors want to see a sketch, so
Right.
I end up having to work that stuff out, and it's always a better approach. I know that I should do it. I don't.
This is a revelation for me here, Eric.
What's this?
Already, what you've shown already, Dave. I think I agree with you. It's like there's instant, kind of instant results, or at least in my mind, I can definitely understand. I mean, you can see the energy going from the back leg to the front leg, and that's kind of hard to do sometimes.
It's very hard, yeah. And when you don't have it, sorry, Eric.
No, I was saying it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And when that's not there, especially when it's really not there, it can make it really kills our work when there's just no at all and no force.
Sure. And as a matter of fact, I think there is, on that term alone, there is an instructor out there by the name of Michael Matesi. I don't know if you've seen his books before. It's literally called Force.
Yep.
I have. Yeah, we've talked about that on the channel. Now, I will admit, I don't understand a lot of it, and so I think maybe a really good reintroduction to it from somebody that understands it maybe a little bit more than we do. Well, certainly.
Well, to be fair, I don't have as much of an intimate understanding of it as I should, but based on what I've been able to sort of like suss out, reading through one of those books is like, I'm in remedial math and that thing is in like nuke physics land, So based on what I could glean off of it, it's effectively what I told you right now, which is always understand what your line of action is. And in this case, it's our Deadpool leaning forward like this, right? Mm-hmm. So most of the stuff that's happening, or most of the choices I'm making in that lean is helping to transfer that force forward. Right? So I'm not going to do anything to betray that. I'm going to do everything that I can to pay attention to it and really optimize for that force transference, right? Or actually that movement. The force transference, everything that's over on this side is everything that I was just talking about all of 5 minutes ago, which is how does that force displace all of that energy that's inside this tube, that's inside this bag of, this bag that represents the leg that's 80% filled with liquid.
I really love that that mental picture of the balloon. I think is really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just wanted to take a minute to thank all of you guys again for being here. We have Tom McGart here. We have Jimmy Reyes here. Allison McGlone. Henry Jeremick is here. Benjamin Soto. Johnny D is here. Russ Hicks. Basically, we've got the crew. Art9 is here. And I also, if you guys don't mind, I wanted to quickly talk about our sponsor, and that is Comics on Coffee. And let me just show you. This is what I'm drinking right now. It's kind of cold by now, but it's still pretty good. So here it is. And this one is, cool. They don't name them. It's really good, though. It's the character is called Phantom Starkiller. And these actually also come, I'm a little bright here for some reason, but these also come with a page from a comic, and it's got one of these things I don't know how you use these. I've never been able to figure them out, but you can actually get access to the comic online. So anyway, really phenomenal coffee. It's comicsoncoffee.com. If you go there and input code David Finch, you can get a discount. I cannot remember what that discount was. I'm so sorry to Comics on Coffee, but it is a discount and it's phenomenal coffee. There you go. Shout out to the sponsor.
That is awesome. You got a sponsor. That is so freaking cool.
They are great. It's a really good coffee, and it comes with comics right on there. And this one, Phantom Starkiller, is from Scout Comics. So yeah, very cool.
I saw the art. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, how do we then continue to push that exaggeration? So that volume, right? So I still believe in I think that when it comes to exaggerating this pose, I think this would pretty much be this is like something I could be pretty proud of, but it still would be something that I'd push moving forward, right? I would still push this even further. Now, the line that I'm trying to sort of like negotiate in my head is how far do I take it to the point where it's not even recognizable to the original source material that you had, and I don't think I should go that far. So I can, for the most part, start rendering now.
Yeah, well, I have to say already, um, I love it. And it is so much more dynamic than what I started with. I think a big part of it is you hollowed the chest instead of sticking it out, which is something that I always do. I always end up pushing my chest out. So,
Yeah, sure.
but
Sure. If
hollowing it it has like a natural line of beauty that runs all the way through the figure from his head down through his foot. If you guys can see it there, it's a nice curved and then opposing curved line down into his foot, and it just flows. That's not something that I had in my original at all, and it really, I'm just drawing it myself, following along, and so much nicer.
And it's the same concept, right? I mean, technically, this rib cage would not have this much give to it, right? Like rib cages don't necessarily work that way, you know. But yeah. I took that artistic liberty of transferring that energy over to this side of the rib cage, which then allows it. And again, this is a level of exaggeration that stylistically may not work for a lot of people, but the principle is sound, right? You can push it too far, or you can push it even further. You know, too far means, hey, within the context of your style, it's going to look really super wonky. But if you are already dealing the really loose, very sort of like animated style, you can push this even further. But I think this is a happy middle for what I saw in your drawing and what I'm trying to do with it. And I hope it's okay so far.
Yeah, I think it's really great.
I've picked up a ton already. I'm just I'm finding myself staring more than drawing here because there's so much to learn just of what you've shown us already.
For me, there are a handful of cues when it comes to selling volume, and I think that's another thing that a lot of people don't have a mindfulness towards. By the way, you have a super chat there, Dave.
Oh, right. Thank you. The Art Jedi has a super chat for $2. Thank you very much. Art Jedi, actually, who is responsible for the Finch Flock logo. So, you know, we own forever.
Right on.
And he says, you two have taught me so much. Can't thank you enough. Well, thank you very much.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Okay, so I talk about not betraying the volume that you're trying to sell, not betraying sort of like the overall shape that you're trying to sell, right? I try to look for, and I think this is why the original Iron Man, the original costume with like the two discs on the hips and the disc in the front is so effective to me when it comes to really being rudimentary in explaining to you how the anatomy, or at least how the volume is facing towards, away, you know, towards or away from camera. Because, and I'll explain it on this other sheet, right? When you have points of reference, this circle on the chest, which looks really sort of like overly simplistic and almost too simplistic, but it really is genius because the moment you start turning it in space, that circle ends up turning into an ellipse, right? And so does this belt, right? And you don't need too many things as design by way of design elements to help you communicate volume. You need key things to help you communicate volume. And so that's what I'm asking people to do, to be like, be wary of, or pay attention and be wary when you betray a detail that helps, that contradicts that volume, you know? So in this case, if we're paying attention to things like, you know, what are the things that'll help us identify that this volume is foreshortened going towards the leg? I think it's those hip pouches that he has, right? I don't know if this is if we're doing movie Deadpool or not.
It really doesn't matter. So I think whatever, and because it doesn't matter, whatever is gonna, you know, help us get across the volume. I have to say there are times costumes can drive me up the wall because lines of the costume actually contradict a good flow in space. It drives me crazy.
Absolutely, and that's when exaggeration really comes into play for me. So, for instance, there are times when you have this, you know, looking straight on a thigh, right? And you have this line, and here's the outside part of the thigh, here's the knee, here's the outside part of the bottom leg. And there's this line that goes like this, right? When you draw that conceptually in perspective, right, foreshortened, right? That line suddenly does this. And boy, is that a pain to sort of like communicate that this leg is foreshortened moving towards you. In my experience, right, at least for me, I really am very severe on how to compensate for that line. I cheat that line over so that I can communicate the volume even more, even though it's unrealistic. I do it just enough that you still have this concept that in one of the panels or in one of the shots, that thing is a bit more diagonal. But the moment I put it into perspective, I really cheat it because I want you to understand that this volume, this tube, is coming towards us.
Well, I have to say
Anyway.
I'm learning a lot, and that is definitely another one because, actually that line on the leg, and I can't remember what character, but it happens all the time. And yeah, I need to just start doing that because it flattens a leg so badly. Or arms have the same thing when
Absolutely.
a line comes across diagonally. We have a couple of
Absolutely.
super chats. We have a super chat from Greg L. Static Art. He says and by the way, I saw Greg in Miami, so good to see you here again. He said, trying and can't put this pose on the page. I'd really recommend, just loosening up and just going for it and do what ERIC CANETE is recommending and what he does himself. And that is just draw it over and over again. Don't do what I do and marry yourself to one pose, especially if it's not working. So
Sorry? I think what Eric said is really important too. I mean, he mentioned the word cheat, and yes, I mean, it's not fine art, it's not, but that's not what we're going for. Like you've said before, Dave, we're going for, something that looks cool, something that looks in your face.
Yes.
And hearing Eric say that he'll break rules to get the effect he wants is super helpful.
Yeah.
Because I think as a beginner, you really want to nail every single part of the anatomy, and doing that totally kills your pose, your done, whatever dynamic thing you had going for it is just dead at that point. So
I want to follow that up with something, Eric, and I think it's got a lot to do with when somebody implements the thing that I'm doing and it doesn't seem to turn out right, because what they're glomming onto is ultimately like, a certain set of rule sets. And I see this a lot in the majority of the people who are just at the beginning of their art journeys, which is they really do inhabit rules quite comfortably because it gives them a pass-fail. Does that make sense? Right? Like they know anatomy, the neck anatomy works like this, and they have a point of reference in an anatomy book, or in a George Bridgman book, or in a Glenn Villepeu book, because it's correct. Right? That's the pass-fail that I'm talking about, right?
Right.
So when they start implementing all of these push proportions and it doesn't look correct, they don't have that sort of anchor that gives them is this working? And I'll say this, until you sort of have a firmer grasp on that baseline foundational understanding of anatomy, having the confidence to move forward in this push proportion kind of space is really going to be uncomfortable, if not sort of like it's not going to be successful for you because you won't have a point of reference. It's going to be a lot on feel, and it's going to be a lot on sort of like the exercise of doing it. Is this starting to make sense within the context of the style that you're implementing?
Right.
So, Erica, would you mind if we put ours up quickly? And what I'd like actually is for you to just take a look at them and maybe give us a little bit of, because I'm trying to follow what you've got, and I feel like I have it. Okay, it doesn't look as good, but not you. So anyway, take a look and we'll start with Eric and just maybe if you could give us a couple of comments on how we're coming along here.
Yes.
I've actually erased mine quite a few times just because I'm just noticing how much I can push that. It doesn't look as good as Eric's, but I understand, how this volume here being pushed this
now
way.
Gonna start, Yep, it's going to start
really,
moving forward. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm actually going to foreshorten it a whole lot more.
Yeah,
And,
it's all within the context of your style. It's got a lot to do with like how typical are you to foreshorten this extremely, right? In the body of my work, I often push this front leg almost to the ridiculous nth degree. But within the context of your style, you'll know, hey, I've crossed the line. I shouldn't, this is not something I would regularly do, and it would really scream out, hey, I'm trying something that is not within context of the stuff that I did in the past. So I think
it's definitely an uncomfortable feeling, but I think that's what makes it good. I mean, that just means I'm being pushed into the learning zone.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm definitely gonna keep this in mind going forward because that's how we all learn, is being pushed out of our comfort zone into a better place. So.
Absolutely. Well, it's looking great so far. All right, and this is where I am now.
Oh, brilliant.
And
Holy
this is my
cow.
best attempt so far. It's not perfect, and I can tell that there are some elements that I'm missing. But I find
That's
that
pretty strong. That's pretty dang strong. I mean, all the weight is transferring. I can see it in your style. The foreshortening works. That's great. All of the, I was saying, like, I'm pushing this rib cage here, right? And now I'm imagining that balloon is having stress put on it. So when I start rendering this to finish, I'm actually going to start rendering all of this stretching that's happening because all of that weight is being pushed into that rib cage, and you're capturing that perfectly within the context of your style.
Yeah, he looks really grounded.
Michael Johnson Curry has a super chat for $5, and thank you very much. He says, I feel like I'm misunderstanding something. If I push something forward, won't the liquid be pushed back by gravity? I think I'm misunderstanding.
No, I think you're absolutely right. What you're actually, that's everything that you're saying tracks, except for the fact that once the liquid gets pushed forward, we're taking a snapshot of it. It's something that's being held in time, right? And there is something to be said about how the balloon or the container, right? In this case, it's the rib cage. In another case, it might be this front thigh. It has a lot of give, right? And then we were talking about this earlier. There are things that this balloon or that liquid displacement is going to counteract to. In the example that you gave, David, it's the rebar or the debris that the foot is landing on, in which the fluid is then going to start coming back. So it's two things. One, we're taking a snapshot of it in its sort of like hyper materialized form, hyper whatever form, right? And then the other one is it's being in the shapes, the volume that it's taking, the sort of like this squishy nature of it being at the front part of the thigh is being informed by the immovable object that is the debris or the rebar. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Allison Malone has a super chat, which I missed, and she just called me out, and I'm so sorry, Allison. She says, my super stylized art can get more stylized. Yeah, you can, especially when you do it in a smart way, and it's not just, and this is something for me, when I see something that's really cartoony, even when it really works, I don't understand it, and so it seems like an affectation, like a style, and it's, when it really works, there are rules to it that I've never understood, so I'm learning.
Yeah, it really has, it's coming from my animation background because that's, I used to storyboard a lot. And a lot of storyboarding is just capturing the moment, right? Like capturing the sort of the conceptual movement that is then going to be translated through an animator's hands, right? So I'm trying to give them as much information about the intent and movement of that character so that then somebody can go like, oh, I get it. They're moving left to right. There's a lot of force behind. There's a lot of effort behind it. Or the difference between that and like kind of casually walking across the room. So volume displaces very differently based on the force that's applied to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I hope this is, what else do I end up thinking about and talking about? Oh, okay. So now that we've taken it from the original shot that you had, David, right? And we've kind of like swiveled the camera closer to a, not necessarily an immediately front view, but definitely closer to it being foreshortened in that capacity. I was talking about, go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to say, it's always more immediate when something is really coming out, pushing out towards you.
Sure.
Just that alone, but it's also, the pose is much stronger, and there is much more of a weight transference in what you have. Greg has a super chat for $5. Thank you, Greg. And he says, may I ask someone to break down the foreshortening of that closer arm, and if it's not too much, how the torso shape is being used for this pose?
Oh, sure. Are you doing that, David?
Yeah, let me, you know what, I'm going to give you guys my interpretation, because I've been thinking about this while I've been drawing this, and you can tell me, Eric, if I'm off base here, but I feel like I'm okay. I'm going to show you guys. This is what I'm thinking. So here's the arm. Hopefully this isn't, you know what, let me do it on this paper here. So here's the arm. It's foreshortened. It gets very, very wide here, and then the upper arm, and then the shoulder, and obviously the hand, and here's the gun. So that's the basic thing. Now, I really like peeking these shapes out and pushing them back quite a bit in the forearm, because it works to sell that foreshortening. But something that I was thinking when I was looking at what you're doing and thinking about what you're doing is the arm is really being pushed out this way, and it's coming to a lock. And what I mean is, if you punch until your body naturally locks, and that's the extent of your punch. And you can really feel that power when you feel that lock. And that's something that in figure dynamics I really like is that point you push to where you hit resistance, and that's where it's like a snap of a whip. Anyway, so
That's it.
I kind of, if I'm imagining this being a form that's got some liquid to it, I still want this to be far back. I don't want to push it forward, but I did really shallow this angle and lengthen this a little bit. In my sketch, I don't think it was really apparent, but that's kind of what's going through my head because I'm imagining that being kind of pushed forward and down here. So that's what I was thinking there.
Yeah, 100% accurate. Okay, what's next from here? I don't quite remember how Deadpool's costume goes, but we're gonna play around with it. we're gonna fake it.
I need to open my browser and find a picture actually.
Okay, so here's a couple of things that, especially when it comes to something like this belt. This belt is helpful to me in so many different ways. One, in the Iron Man context that I was talking to you about earlier, which is once I put it on a plane that is a chest, oh man, it's such a great register for like, hey, he's facing this way, and so that circle turns into an ellipse, right? It's really, really a very useful tool. And as soon as it turned into the triangle version of that repulsor, it's not a repulsor, right? What is that thing called on Iron Man's chest? Anyway, the moment it turned into a triangle, it was even that much more helpful. Probably so much easier to draw because a triangle, so much easier to draw in perspective than an ellipse. I don't know about you, but I always have trouble like landing a really nice clean line when I'm drawing an ellipse or a circle in perspective.
Absolutely. I've always just relied on inkers to fix that for me.
I don't know if you have any of these, you guys, but I have like a little tiny oh gosh, what is it? An architect's envelope that has degrees of ellipses inside of it. Do you guys still have access to that at all? It's like an ellipse template, but like from 10 degrees all the way to 80.
Yeah, I need to get that at some point. It'd be actually pretty helpful.
Yeah. I used to have that, and these days, because back then I used to be so sort of like hyper focused on making sure to sell that ellipse, but these days my art is pretty loose enough where I can kind of fake it, and you know, God bless Procreate, that there's a functionality in it where if you hold down your finger or if you hold down the line, it turns into a really, really nice ellipse. Anyway, the beauty and advantages of a digital medium. But in this case, this perfect circle that represents Deadpool's belt, right? I will cheat that. And what I mean by cheat, I will turn it into a complement. I will then turn into a complementary element that helps sell this movement. Here goes my pen issues. Wait, there's lead. Here we go. Forgive the clicking in the background. Here we go. So because we know that the movement is going from the transference of this back right leg to the upper left part of the shoulder, I'm going to do what I can to cheat just a small little ellipse on that belt. Just a tiny bit, as if it too was also moving forward. Now, whereas we referred to the thigh with like a very malleable volume, the belt can also have volumetric concept, except it has it has less give than the thigh, clearly, right? So let's say I'm trying to think of a material that would still move, but not necessarily move as much as a balloon. But I think you guys get the concept.
Yeah, a tire, maybe. You don't want a car.
Yes, right.
A half-filled tire, how about?
Right. And so similarly, that's what I would do with this Deadpool belt. Is just ellipse it just enough, right? And then,
it's scaring me to do. This is so far from what I would never try this.
And then all the what do you call it? All the pouches, right? I'm doing the same exact thing, right? I am just following the natural transference of that energy as I start to tilt them up.
This is revelatory. I mean, this is stuff I never understood before. Like you were saying, Dave, you can't. It's hard to express how things work when you're looking at, we took a look at Joe Quesada, and trying to understand that without, very, very difficult. But what you're explaining, it's a light bulb going off here for me. I feel like I can understand more now.
Yeah, absolutely.
How folks can achieve that.
And I think that's key, right? I think and I want to go back to an earlier point, because like, the discomfort that you're experiencing, David, it's like, I think because you've never done it before, and in context to your own work, it's like, oh man, this space is definitely not one that I typically inhabit. But if you understand the rule, and if people can take away anything from our conversation today, I would like it to be that just have a basic understanding of the rule, not because you're going to immediately implement it, but when you're like, boy, I really need something to give this a little bit of oomph, right? You can take this out of your back pocket, right? It's not for all the time,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's like language. It's very difficult to express a concept that you don't have vocabulary for. And obviously with art, it's going to be the same. Not understanding any of this means it's just not an option you have if you ever want to use it. I will say though, for me, I am the kind of person that really likes that hard and fast rule that I can just follow and there you go, it's right, and so it's a challenge for me to break that at times.
Yeah, I'm in the same way. Eric and I were talking offline yesterday about like, the other night I was watching you guys paint in oil, and we just got into like maybe how long was that, Eric? Like a 5-10 minute conversation about just approach and painting, and I'm fascinated by any and all of that because I feel like that's a completely alien language, to your point, David. Like I don't know it that well, so anytime somebody talks it, I'm like, I'm all ears. I'm zoned into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You should join us for one of those. And,
oh yeah, I'd love to fail spectacularly.
That's a lot of fun, and it's like we were talking about, just learning from the wonderful guests that we have on, and I think it would be a lot of fun if you were to join us for someone like that.
Allison McGlone has a $5 super chat. Thank you so much again, Allison. She says, so I think it's like animation. So I think like it's animation and stretch the figure art, like doing it. Am I missing something? Sorry. Like doing a beginner ball animation. So she's saying, it's like what squash and stretch, basically.
It is. Yep. It's effectively that thing that I showed you guys earlier about the balloon. What did I do with that in the initial sketch? Pardon the whistling in the background. I think it captures exactly what Allison is talking about there, which is this, right? So in this case, when the balloon drops, right, the majority of the fluid is going to be somewhat suspended within the context of the volume. It hits, right? The fluid catches up to the immovable force that is the ground. It flattens, right? But then that energy disperses to the left and right of this balloon, right? And if it has any sort of bounce to it at all, right, now the liquid leads up and leaves the majority of the balloon behind. Again, this is assuming this balloon is only like, the bouncing balloon is only about 80% filled. Okay.
Anthony G has a $5 super chat. Thank you, Anthony. And by the way, generally speaking, I keep saying this, but I want to say that when we're doing these streams, I don't encourage super chats just because it's so easy to miss them. But Anthony, and thank you, Anthony. He says, I like to incorporate extreme foreshortening into a lot of my work, so this is incredibly useful information. Thanks for doing this, Eric.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. I sometimes think that because a lot of this stuff is just bouncing around in my head, and I find that one of the most effective ways that I can learn and not just immediately just go into autopilot is to sort of like audibilize it as I'm sitting here talking to myself, so it feels a little weird, But then I figured it's a really helpful. I come from a history of like not having access to like art school, so I am so all ears when it comes to something that I don't have any familiarity with. And my attitude is like, I have had many mentors who have taken the time and effort to give away as much of the information that they've learned through their sort of work history, their sort of experiences, that if there's any way that I can then take the stuff that I've learned and pay that forward to the next person, and most importantly in such a way that it's understandable and usable for them, exercisable, forgive the term, I'm really, really happy about that.
Yeah, it's artists being generous the way that you are now that um, hopefully paves the way for the next generation of artists that will, one day take things further.
Sure. Fingers crossed. So thank you for saying that. I'm looking for the sketch that you did, or that I did of your sketch, and I've lost track of it. Typical of me. Oh, here it is.
Comic
Because I wanna
book, Comic Pro Bootcamp just gave a super chat. I think that's Ryan Benjamin, isn't it? Ryan Benjamin.
Is that Ryan Benjamin?
I think so. Or someone at Comic Pro Bootcamp.
I apologize that I don't know, and I really should. But thank you so much for the super chat. $20, very, very generous.
That is awesome.
And yeah, speaking of Ryan Benjamin, he showed me once before how the thigh muscle, the concept that Eric's talking about, how the thigh muscle can really sell foreshortening pretty easy by accentuating the top curve. So I'm definitely seeing it here with what Eric's showing. And
this is changing how I draw, Eric.
yeah, this is.
Is it? Hopefully for
My
the better.
brain
Hopefully.
is kind of breaking right now, but I can definitely see this, working, going forward, and just thinking about it as I'm drawing.
Well, I was very, very fortunate to start at Top Cow. It was a long time ago now, but around a lot of artists, and I learned, everything that I know from those days. But you learn from the artists that are there, and we didn't have an artist that could do what you do. So, yeah, and it's so easy at conventions and things like that. I would never come up to you, Eric, and just say, "Hey, can you explain this whole thing to me?" I would never do that,
Oh, sure. Okay, how do I explain this concept? This is going to be a little bit clumsy, but I think this is the best way I've been able to sort of like suss it out for myself when it comes to understanding the hierarchy of information that helps to convey foreshortening concepts, right? So this is 1A, and this is 1B. Typically, they're both on this almost on the same plane. This is 2, and this is 3. So in this drawing, in my brain, right, there are 3 elements that help convey this perspective in foreshortening, right? 1, in 1A, 1B, they share the same kind of space. Is the forearm, or excuse me, the left arm, right? This foreshortened thing that we drew, holding the gun, and this left leg, right? So they occupy one plane, and I'll try to apply that to the drawing. I'll try to put it into context of the drawing. The second part is this torso / groin / the head, right? That's the second part. And finally, the third part is his back leg that kind of accommodates this arm that's reaching to the back of the sword. So I'll show it to you in context of this drawing. What I'm looking at now is like this arm and this leg are effectively in the same plane, right? The next bit of information, and this is how I'm adjusting it in the what do you call it? This is how I'm adjusting it by way of attention, by way of like, not necessarily even detail, right? Like by way of dominant shape, right? So I see this head, and I'm like, this head is going to end up competing way too much with a lot like this overall shape here, this overall shape here, right? And potentially the gun along with the fist. So I'm going to do a little bit to shrink it down. Just a tiny bit so it doesn't end up competing because it's in that second zone right behind that first cube, right? And finally, when it comes to this third zone that was represented by the right leg, right arm, I'm going to do everything that I can to push that back and not have it by way of shape compete with anything else in the foreground and in the middle.
That makes sense.
It's a tricky balancing act because sometimes I'll get there and I'm all like, whoa, now that head is way too small. So it's a matter of like, remember I said earlier, it was like, it's a matter of feel. And you'll get a feel for it eventually, how much you can push like shapes and the proportions in contrast to each other.
But just breaking it down into zones like that, my need to have structure and rules, I love that right away. I mean, that's something that I can immediately kind of latch onto.
And that's how come I feel comfortable pushing the proportion of this leg way back. Because I want to sell, and the reason why I do that, if you really think about ultimately what's the purpose of that, is because I want to sell as much distance from this leg, this knee that's coming towards us, away. I'm taking this leg and pushing it as far away from this front leg as possible. I'm taking this hand that's this big in the foreground, and now in this forearm that's this big in the foreground, and I'm pushing this forearm, this bicep, this hand further away from it, just in context and contrast their size. Does that make sense?
It does. If you don't mind, sorry, but the upper arm there is just being cut off. Can't see it.
Oh, sorry. Yep, there we go.
No, perfect.
Forgive
Thank you. We have a super chat from JDS CT, and he says, Dave and Eric, love the variety of guests you're bringing to these streams. Eric, thanks for coming and sharing.
Thank you for being here.
And Comic Pro Bootcamp, by the way, oh, and sorry, I just cut you off there, says, yes, it is. It is Ryan Benjamin. Thank you so much for coming by. Really appreciate it. It's very cool to have Ryan here.
Okay.
So Eric, I've noticed something as well, Dave. And you're talking about that forearm, how the bottom is also not much definition compared to the top, and that is really selling them. You know, not just the perspective, but the action of that arm.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something actually I'm very careful about, because if you take a look at it just in shape alone, because I'm not really sort of handcuffing myself to 100% anatomy, here's something that I'm very aware about, especially once you start exaggerating. See these three shapes, right? They're almost so repetitive, it betrays the perspective. It betrays the, what do you call it? It betrays the foreshortening. So I really have to be deliberate about like how this rhythm works without having to like, oh, how do I break this up so it doesn't look like it's just a bunch of bumps in a straight line below them, right? And sometimes when I don't have an immediate answer, I just leave it alone. I leave it alone for later. But it's something like this.
It's amazing how the human eye picks up repeating patterns like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Not just picks it up, but it's so hard to fight. It's something you have to train yourself to avoid, you know.
Okay. I don't know what this costume looks like, so forgive me.
I scrambled and found reference just a bit ago. No, it ultimately doesn't matter too much. We're really not here for, you know, for an accurate drawing of Deadpool. That's not the point. As much as we all love Deadpool. Oh, you know, that I love the way that his head is tucked into his chest. It just has so much strength to it, and I don't have that. And I've actually, no, this is a situation where I say I end up destroying my page. Well, I've kind of done that a little bit, trying to capture what you have in the head. I can't. And
yeah.
At some point, I think I might have to just accept that my head's not going to have that real
That's
push.
all right. That's okay. As long as there's a fundamental understanding of why it's being done, right? Mm-hmm. It's because as this arm is, you know, you were talking about it earlier, I think, Dave, which is like the tension in this arm is being communicated by how it's pressing up against the side of this guy's cheek, right? So all of that force, all of that transference of the tension of this arm is helped communicated by just him tucking his cheek right against this the shoulder muscle. Now, is it realistic? Probably not, right? But I think in animation, there are so many things that have you ever seen like in-betweens in animation, how gross they look?
Not so much, actually. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I was really familiar. So
yeah, if you like pause animation in those in-between frames, some of those drawings look so janky. They look so poor. And it's got a lot to do with the fact that it's not about the accuracy of the drawing. It's about communication of the action, right? And sometimes you have to draw you have to over-exaggerate a drawing in order to communicate that action. Okay.
Adam Rebotaro has a $5 super chat. Thank you very much. He says, longtime watcher of David, you've helped my own craft immensely. Thank you, and thank you for that, Adam. Eric, loving Arcathena, and your dropbook is the gem of my collection.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind. He's speaking about my 2021 sketchbook that I collect, I think, almost every year. Less so these days because I haven't had free time to sort of do commissions and then recollect them into an art book that I make available to the public. But if you're interested in any and all of that, you can go to. You don't mind me plugging something, do you, David?
No, of course not.
You can go to iconiccomics.com. Arcathena Books 1 and 2 is available there. And so is that drop sketchbook. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for the prompt. And thank you, David, for letting me shill a little bit.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so here's a challenge that I often run into. Because this leg is receding, right, away from us, my natural tendency is to draw whatever, element, whether it be like a crease, a groin, whatever, to like have volume now start moving away from me, right? I have to make a choice one way or the other because a straight line does not communicate that volume, right? Even though it's realistic, right? So I either want to go this way, right? Or I want to go the opposite way as it's moving away from me. Either one for me works, but in this case, let's see what I can get away with if I move it away from me.
Tia Ferguson says, goodness, foreshortening is my weakness. I can only do it by accident. Maybe it's like you said. It's not about the accuracy, but the portrayal of the action.
Yes. Now, again, it's sometimes, especially depending on the style that you're utilizing, the kind of foreshortening I'm talking about, but really is a betrayal to the style that you're doing. So that's the reason why I encourage people to understand what the intent is, and then somehow through exercise and practice, wrap your style around it to see if it pushes it way too far. And then you'll know how to wind it back, right? Because if you have the intent in mind, then you'll know exactly, hey, that's way too far. That's not within my style, but that's still, if I pull it back this much, it's still within context of the stuff that I historically do.
Yeah. Now, I want to mention quickly that I adjusted my shoulder the way that you were talking about, and it pushed my head the way that I've been trying to achieve, and I could not get it to work just with the head. So that was great, and I wouldn't have gotten that otherwise. So.
I'm glad that it was helpful. Okay. I think I got enough detail here for me to start. This is also one of my oh gosh, I don't know about you guys. Please tell me that I'm not alone in this, but I get bored with this part. I get bored with the rough part of the drawing, and I want to get to the inking part, or at least I want to get to the rendering part. This is probably in any convention that somebody asks me to draw a commission for them. This is as tight as I'll get, and then I just start rendering with marker. So, yeah, would either of you feel comfortable enough to start moving to the marker stage?
Absolutely, and yeah, this is about the point where I need to switch to. I just don't have the patience. The pencil, unless I'm doing full pencils, I pull out there. So before we start, though, let me just quickly show where we are here.
Yes.
So let's start with Eric.
Holy cow, that's great, man! You started over again.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've looked at this leg, trying to push it even more, and it's definitely uncomfortable, but it works. It really does. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, that leg really pushes forward well, and then foreshortening the arm looks really good. And using just a clean line on the inside of the legs there, it just gives them a nice flow all the way through. And here's mine right now. Now, I fought as hard as I could to be as cartoony as I could.
That's okay.
I really want to take advantage as much as I can, but I can feel my natural, like, I pull from it. It's really difficult. This is, one of the most dynamic things I've ever drawn. I'm just going to say that right now.
Are you really?
I'm very happy. Come on, look at that. That is so. I don't draw this way, and I'm really excited to just keep experimenting with this. I'm pretty happy with it. So if I say so myself, I mean, I'm watching what you're doing and picking up, but I'm liking it. All right, so here we go. We're gonna start inking. Let me grab my pen.
Okay, so here's something that people have found very puzzling about my, and we were talking about rendering things in Copics tonight, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's 10 o'clock now, so
how much time do we have?
All night, but I do want to get as much out of this. This is, by the way, had been absolutely phenomenal. I could do this until 6 in the morning. So,
Hey, Eric,
how much time do we have?
Sorry, Eric.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to
how
see
much?
the foot. I wanted to see the foot of his foreshortened. Yeah, there we go. Let me just scribble that in real quick. Sorry about that, Eric.
No, that's okay. That foot I stole directly out of 101 Dalmatians, the original animated from Disney from back in the day. All right, so here's the. By the way, did I get an answer for either? I missed. I may have missed it. How much time do we have left for the stream? Are you only on for about an hour or so?
We do 2 hours. That's the general time frame. Now we do have more time, but at the same time, obviously, I don't want to keep you here forever.
No,
but
that's okay. I shall try to render as fast as I can. The point that I was trying to make was that in the process, and have you ever done Copic marker drawings at conventions before, Dave?
Never. I've done them just a little bit with Erick Grove, Eric.
Yes.
But yeah, I've never had the guts to try it at a show, and one of these days I really need to.
Yeah. It's puzzling to some people as far as my process is concerned because, somebody like Terry Dodson or something like that, they often go and ink something and then, actually no, Terry Dodson's similar to me. Who can I think of where they ink first and then Copic thereafter? But I Copic first and then ink thereafter. So here we go.
Oh no, okay. I've already started inking. I'm pulling out.
That's okay.
I'm going to stop inking with what I have here, and then I'll start following. I assumed we were okay. Let me grab my Copic. So back in a second.
So,
all right.
How
got
do
my
I
Copic
explain
back. Sorry about that.
That's okay. How do I explain the? Oh, okay. So I often talk about, and I don't know if you guys have heard this term before, but I often talk about like light hierarchy. Have you guys heard of that term?
Light hierarchy.
No. It's the same thing as like your color hierarchy, right? Your saturation hierarchy, right? But because I'm typically dealing in all grays, I don't say the saturation part, right? So what it does is, and there's a fast way that I render stuff at shows because, depending on how many commissions I have at any given time. But I often implement that concept of light hierarchy that allows me to, number one, prioritize what's the most important in the image, and 9 times out of 10 it's going to be like the face and upper torso. And then secondly, start making quick but often accurate choices as to where I'm going to drop my shadow, if that makes any sense. So
it does.
As a cheat, because I'm left-handed and I see that you are too, David.
Yes, that's right.
Because I cheat and I really have a bad tendency to like run my left hand over the drawing. I make my light source come from the upper right-hand corner down towards the bottom left-hand corner whenever I'm rendering. So let me see if I can remember how to do this. It's been a while. With my Copic markers, they give you the full set from like 0 to all the way to 10. I'm using warm right now, but I skip every other one because I blend out of it. Pretty purposely. So assume for a minute that light is coming from the upper right-hand corner, and directionally going down towards the bottom part of the left-hand corner. So I'll start with my not necessarily darkest marker, but what I think to be my darkest value in the bottom left-hand corner, which is like this leg that's receding away from us. And,
so, Eric, quickly, I've got the range here. So I've got black, C10, C9, C8. They're all cool. So what would you say?
I'm using 9 right now.
All right, perfect. All right. Again, I hate to need the rule, but I need the rule.
That's okay. That's all right. That makes total sense to me. And from there,
Gene Arvin asked, is there any way to record this to watch it later in YouTube? It'll be available afterwards, and I'm definitely going to be watching it more than once.
Yeah.
And from there, and it doesn't even really matter to me what the elements are unless I'm particularly sensitive to it in as far as just legibility is concerned. So in the case of this, the belt that he's using right now, right, I may skip to a lighter value. In this case, I'm like using a 4. But 9 times out of 10, 90% of the time, I'm just transferring it to every other value. So in this case, we're going from like 9 to 7 to 5 to 3 to 1 and eventually to 1. And that's how I'll start off my basic foundation value. That's where I start my basic foundation value, right? I lay that value down all the way up until I get closest to that light source. So in this case, it's probably going to be like W1, or in your case, David, it's going to be like C1, right?
Okay.
So because Copics are so forgiving, they'll just blend together pretty easily.
So your belt is 7, right?
Say that again, Eric. I missed it.
You said your belt was 7?
The belt that I used was like a 4 because I wanted it to stand up later, but it's okay.
I think I can actually change it a bit.
Yeah, this is where, with Copics, neither of us are as experienced, so we really need the hand holding at this point.
That's okay. That's all right. But you understand the concept that I'm going for, right? Which is all I'm doing is creating a gradation throughout the length of his body, right?
That part completely makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
The tough thing when you're not as familiar with Copics, and I find in the way that Eric and I have worked in the past, is you just drastically underestimate the color and then you build it up slowly just because it's easy to blow it out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so because this leg is in the foreground, right? And because I want it to protrude as opposed to recede, I'm going to be very light. In this case, I'm just rendering it with a 1. And to your point, David, I could always go back in there and add a darker tone, right? It's near impossible to go the other way, right? Which is to go lighter once I put down the dark tone first. So I play it safe by just adding a lighter tone in the foreground or anything that I want. Remember the zones that we were talking about earlier? Yeah. Pretty much anything. I recede the light hierarchy in that same exact concept, right? So zone 1 or like box 1, foreground, which is like forearm, left hand or left arm, foreground, left leg. That I'm going to keep kind of light because it's going to allow it to just pop forward.
All right.
And I think that is... And this is the quick and dirty version of it because we still got the inking part to do. Right? And from here, I'll start identifying where potentially my drop shadows are going to be. So let's use this, the left arm armpit as an example. I know that when I came in here and dropped this foundational gray, this was a 3 before I went and transitioned into 1. So I take one step back, and this is the rules I think you're going to appreciate, David.
Yeah.
Which is I take one step back for 3, which is a 5, right? And I put the drop shadow under his armpit accordingly, just like that. And so on and so forth. So under his chin here, depending on where the sun is, right? It's either going to create a shallow shadow or a long one.
This is definitely an approach that I really like, even just with penciling. I put in my shadows, and I start with the most obvious spots that I absolutely know are going to be shadowed, put those in, and then just start to connect it into a whole.
There you go. And I know for sure that this, what do you call it? This pectoral muscle is going to drop in the shadow, right? Because I want to create that volume. And if I wanted to get fancy, right, I'm going to take this, the bottom part of his rib cage, and then from there, I'm going to blend that out so that it creates that cavity. And so I'll drop one down, which is like maybe a 4 or something like that. And then darker and darker as I'm dropping shadows all over the place. Now this arm, I want, the right arm, I want to recede. So there's opportunity here for me to take that same exact 5. Right? Oop. Let me not break my Copic. And drop that arm into a 5 as well. So we recede even further back.
Can you just show that top section there, Eric?
Oh yeah, sure. Excuse me. Sorry.
Sure.
Right? And in order to recede that, the forearm of the right arm even further back, I'll put that into a 7, like this. Fingers somewhere back here. With that sword. Forgive me if I'm speeding through it.
No,
I
well,
want to give your audience as much of the, close to finish as we can get.
yes, and it's always playable back later. I know I'll certainly be watching it.
Oh, good point.
Eric will, so yeah, that's absolutely okay. In a lot of ways, this is always my favorite part. I'm mad dapping to try and not fall behind.
I'm trying to talk through it, but I'm like, I should just render, because there's, I think people are going to get, I'm going to be really disappointed if I don't take this thing to a finish.
Yeah, we're all here to learn, but it is nice to see a nice picture come out of it in the end, too.
Right. I figured. I'm the same way. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to watch that video later. And when I do end up watching the video, I'm like, oh, they didn't finish it, darn it,
Yep.
I have to remind myself to drag the picture down once I'm rendering out of frame here.
So I'm using a C5, and I'm really kind of going over and just trying to get all my shadowed areas. I think I'll have to go darker for some.
Yes,
but
right.
It's
But
starting
again,
to feel
Copic's
like,
being so forgiving, right? Like, it's great that you oh, I think I can go darker there,
yeah. Oh yeah, much better problem than once you go too dark.
Yes.
Which hopefully we can avoid that.
Oof. Oops. This thing just bled. Oh well. You get the point. Okay.
I really like this approach. Just using the markers and starting this way instead of starting with things. The whole thing has like an airy kind of ethereal feel to it. It's really very cool.
But also, it actually the way I've explained it to people is that it allows me to not be so fussy when it comes to the inking part, because a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the volume, the context of the volume has already been done by the rendering, right? So I can be choosy as whereas in the past I would sit there and go, oh, I need to make sure that wrinkle reads. I need to make sure that whatever, that detail reads. The marker has already done that, right?
Yeah, and detail, I love detail, I have to admit, but implied detail, it can be so much more effective than
Yes.
meticulously putting in every line.
Although I have an appreciation for it, don't get me wrong. I'm incapable of doing it well, but when I see somebody who knows what they're doing with that detail and is very select, very deliberate and strategic about it, oh man, it's awesome. I'm all for it.
Well, I really have to disagree. I think you do it very, very well.
Yeah. Maybe I have an aversion to it because I'm like, oh man, it sounds so exhausting, and then I end up doing it, and I'm not being aware that I'm doing it.
All right. So we at some point, I think, just coming up next month, we're going to be working on gouache, and this is very similar to gouache in that
Right on.
it really fades. So I put it down and I think, oh, it's pretty dark, and then a second later, it's quite a few steps later.
Yeah. It's my wife, who is also an artist, does the same exact thing where a color in gouache looks so rich, and then when it dries, it's pretty tricky, to understand the end state. And people who work in that medium really know what the end product is going to look like. It fools me a lot. It's tricky.
It's like poor Russ is dealing with quite the influx of spam bots here.
Mm.
It's like over and over and over. Yikes.
Well, it says a lot that you guys have very attentive moderators.
We do. We have Eric for Monday Night Draw, and Russ helping now, and yeah, we couldn't do it without him.
All right.
I'm worrying a little bit that I'm already getting a little finicky with detail, but
we haven't even started inking yet, man.
I know.
Now, is that where you believe? Where do you see your either of you guys? Which is a question for both of you. Where do you guys find the most comfort once you're drawing? Like at what stage?
For me, it is the detail. The layout's finished. The pose is finished for better or for worse, but it's finished. And especially once the shadows are locked in, I know what my picture is going to be at that point, and I can just kind of relax. It's nice.
Henry asks, how about feathering with Copics? Oh my gosh, that's way too much work. I'm allergic to the idea of like overworking a piece. I am, one of the key things that I'd learned in my storyboarding career is just the idea that I should only give just as much detail, and this may be completely contrary to what you were just talking about, David, but I should only ever give as much detail as I need to draw in order to communicate the concept, whatever that concept may be. If it's jumping, then great. If it's lighting and mood, that's great. But just draw enough, because in storyboards, you have to get through so many images, right? You have to get through so much drawing for a 21-minute episode that is parceled out between 3 storyboard artists, 7 minutes long each, and you're just storyboarding and just drawing almost like every hour, every second, every minute, every second. So to sort of like laboriously make something, like to put a polish on it, really isn't very conducive to like, smart time management. Now, my takeaway from that is, especially when I came back from storyboarding and started doing comics again, was that I didn't have the patience to put as much detail because I was still in my storyboarding mindset. Now, between then and now, I've kind of gone back and sort of like, okay, this is where I can sort of put a little bit more time, energy, and effort in order to really help make this image sing. But you couldn't convince me of that 10 years ago. I'm just like, let me just get through this image already,
Writers working in comics or in TV shows even, I think can go through a similar kind of a growth. you don't have 3,000 pages to tell some massive epic. You really have to get the point across, and you're a better writer too. That same kind of self-editing.
All right, so I'm being kind of finicky with this back leg because I really want to push it back, but I don't want to overdo it because I know there's still the inking part. So let's see if the inking can come back in there and do its job. But I do allow myself to go back and re-render an area after I've inked and thought like, oh, okay, I can probably do that. I can probably do a little bit more heavy lifting in the inking there too, you know? Okay. Let's see if any of these like marker brushes work. Oh, and by the way, are you both sort of traditional tools people? Do you? Because again,
well,
no patience. I don't have.
I'm traditional enough. I'm going to be using Copic markers, and then I use Tombow brush pens, that kind of thing. So it's
Sure.
relative. I mean, it's not truly traditional, but.
I travel with as many of these disposable markers as I can whenever I'm doing conventions because I go through them so quickly, right?
Oh yeah, you need 4 of each at the very least.
Yeah. I sometimes overcompensate thinking I'm going to be a lot busier than I am, and next thing you know, I'm just traveling with a bag of markers in my... Okay. Here we go. Now, is your chat comfortable with like quiet? Do you typically just, bear down and draw when you're streaming?
I do try to not be quiet.
Yeah.
The only time I really get completely quiet is when I'm really madly trying to, and I'm doing that now. I'm moving through the last of my here, so just getting the last little bit in.
J Pencil Art is asking, why did I use the blue and red for the sketch? Sorry if you answered this. I joined that. That's okay. What I typically use this is again for my animation background, which meant that whenever I was drawing environments or when I was designing characters or when I was storyboarding, back when everything was done traditionally, I used a red and blue pencil that was available in our supply closet in the different places that I worked, right? And so I just kind of, held on to that. And I know it's the red pencil is not forgiving to being erased. So some of my originals back when I used to draw pages traditionally was just a mess, right? It was so off-putting to some people sometimes that they thought that it was rough as opposed to the thing that ended up seeing print. So yeah, it's not very forgiving when it comes to like, when it comes to like erasing, but I can't get it out of my system. I hope that answers your question.
Really like how it looks on an original.
Oh yeah? I can't remember whose original art I had seen. I had traveled to. Have you ever been to Lucca before, Dave, Eric?
A long time ago, but yeah, it was 2000 last time I was there. It's a long time ago.
I had seen an original piece of art, and I can't remember the name of the artist, but I felt like a kinship with them because they too drew with a blue pencil. I suspect it wasn't a non-photo blue, but it was close enough. And some of the remnants of the stuff that they hadn't erased were still on the page.
Michael Johnson Curry says, Eric, how would you apply these great push and pull methods to say talking or more boring scenes?
I typically would not unless there's some kind of subtext, but that's a great question, by the way, because like push and pull is at its core right, is just how to add a dynamic concept onto a typically, pretty easy, legible, I don't want to say boring, but legible drawing, right? You can do that same exact context. You can contextualize a scene when you're having a typical talking scene. Now, how you add a level of dynamism, is that a word?
Sure,
how you
yeah,
add a level
right.
of dynamism into a talking scene is now layering it with subtext. And a lot of people don't know how to engage that very well. And the best way that I can explain it, and I've told this story more than a handful of times, so for those of you who are in the chat have heard it from me before, bear with me. Subtext is what's happening and what's trying to be accomplished within the conversation, right? Sometimes it can just be about whatever, getting a cup of coffee and running your errands or whatever between two of your protagonists, two of your characters. But sometimes it's something else. And I'll give this example, and I don't know if either of you has seen that movie Heat before.
Oh yeah.
Al Pacino, Robert De Niro. Okay. There is this really great moment, and it happens right after Neil, Robert De Niro's character, goes and visits, I think it's Edie. Edie at the bookstore that she works at, which is Hennessy and Ingalls over there in Los Angeles. I don't know if that bookstore is still around, but she's working there, and this to set up the scene. She's working there. She sees Neil. Clearly, she's interested, if not attracted to him. Later on, they go to a coffee shop, and she runs into him again, right? And because she's new in town and she doesn't know anybody, she tries to strike up a conversation. Now, Neil is a bank robber. He's a thief, right? So what he was at that bookstore for was getting a resource about the stress. How would you put it? Like the stress test or the stress parameters of metals, right? Because he's about to go use it to rob a bank, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so she's there trying to strike up a conversation with him, leans over his shoulder. What kind of book you got? And again, he's very paranoid. Who the heck is this lady? Talk to me. And she asks him all sorts of questions that he's not comfortable sort of addressing, and he's kind of sharp with her. He kind of says, lady, who are you? Why are you trying to talk to me? Or asking me about the books that that I'm reading. And she says, well, I work at the bookstore. I see you there from time to time. And that really gets him sort of like, wait, what bookstore are you talking about? Paranoia kicks in, 2x, right? Yeah. And she realizes, well, this conversation, this encounter isn't landing very well. So she tries to excuse herself, and she gives that bit of information where she says, well, I'm new in town. I don't really know anybody. I'm sorry to bother you. I was just trying to strike up a conversation, And he realizes at that point that she's no threat to him. She's being very genuine, right? And that's how their relationship starts. Now, I say all of that because Michael Mann, the director of that movie, is quite brilliant in how he handles and sets up that scene when it comes to his shot selection, how he composes that scene. The beginning of that scene, when Neil is being very paranoid, when he is, suspicious of her intent, her motives, what have you, and you can see that the shot is being, or the composition is being shot over Robert De Niro's shoulder. He's almost covering up, right? He's almost like hiding the thing that he is, but in an even deeper level, he's hiding who he is from her. Not just the book, but his actual character, right? He's a bad guy. He's a thief. He doesn't want he doesn't want her to know anything about him. And until he realizes that she's not a threat, and you can see Michael Mann break the 180, which is a cinematic term of like always maintaining position of your characters within the frame of the camera. So if you are protagonist, sorry, say again.
I was going to say quickly, we've kind of talked about it on the channel before, but the 180, if you're watching hockey, for instance, in Canada, so hockey, and the camera, you'll notice that the camera is always on one side of the rink, because if you took that same camera and put it on the opposite side, it would look like the teams have just switched and now we're trying to score the other goal. And it's the same thing in just general storytelling. Flipping the camera makes it look like everybody has moved, and it can be very disorienting.
Perfectly captured, perfectly said. And so as soon as he decides that that she is no threat and he opens up to her, the camera breaks that 180. Suddenly Neil is more inviting. We're actually seeing we're seeing the front part of his chest as he reaches out his hand, and he says, "I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were. I'm sorry if I was mean or whatever." I think he was, and the theme of what he was saying was like, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to be mean to you. My name is Neil." And he reaches out his hand, right? And it breaks the 180 and recontextualize the scene by recomposing it, right? So now every shot thereafter is him facing her, and the camera is more open for their interaction. And that's what I'm talking about when I say subtext, right? So when you're talking to me about a talkie scene, I always try to understand subtextually what's trying to be accomplished within the context of that scene. Okay, so they're just talking, and maybe this is just an information exchange. But if I can add a layer of subtext to it, similar to that heat example, right? Then it really, and your audience may not even pick it up, but they kind of have a feeling, in as much as when you take a look at a shot in a movie and it's an upshot on your protagonist, you're like, whoa, that's very heroic. And in as much as there's a downshot in your antagonist, you're like, whoa, that guy's about to get his ass handed to him. Right? Like they're in a dominant position and in a recessive position. Your audience doesn't necessarily know in cinema speak what that means, but they inherently know it on a subtextual level.
That is very interesting. I've never heard of a case of the 180 rule being broken for that reason. I'm sure it's not the only time, but I think you subconsciously notice it, or certainly I would have, or maybe not even. But it's that is a total digression. But they actually filmed that movie not far from where Top Cow was at the time when I started out.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and some of the guys went and watched. They saw Robert De Niro there. I think they saw Al Pacino, or maybe it was just Al Pacino. Anyway, they saw some of the people there, and I was so obsessed with working, I never got up from my desk. So it would take me a minute.
That is so cool. I can't believe that they were there when they were shooting that scene then.
Yeah, they were in the diner. So it wasn't that scene. It was a diner scene.
Oh, yeah, when they were both together. That's sort of like standoff, sitting down.
Yeah, truthfully, I've seen the movie a few times, and I'm not actually 100% sure. You know what? I'd have to look at it again. But one of the two, anyway. So, yeah.
Well, the thing is, in that case, like, like you said, you've never heard of the 180 being broken like that before for that very specific purpose. But it always stood out to me when I was watching the movie because it was so obvious, right? It was so like, whoa, that is a weird camera move. It didn't cut even. The camera literally moved over the countertop in order to reestablish the framing between the two of them. And I go like, what is that? And so the more I sat there and I was like, why did you make that move? And Michael Mann is a brilliant director, deliberate in his shot selection, right? Deliberate in his choices. And so when I sat there and thought about it for a while, and I go like, what's happening in this scene right now? This is why movies are whenever I'm watching them, I sometimes take myself out of the narrative and pay attention to the mechanical, technical stuff so much that it's almost counterintuitive to the experience, right? But when I saw that, it took me out of the movie so much because I was like, to your point, David, I was like, that doesn't happen often, So the fact that he's doing that, it must be deliberate. For what reason? And watching that scene for subtext, I was like, oh, I get it, and it's brilliant.
I'm going to need to watch that again just to see that.
Yeah.
And maybe the diner scene again so I can remember. I don't think I've seen that movie probably for 20 years now.
Yeah, I think similar, but it's one of those ones where I studied it most specifically because, when you're storyboarding something and you do run into a talking scene, like you want to have as many points of reference in your Rolodex card. I think it's easy enough to do a really dynamic, really action-packed fight scene. But talking scenes are really difficult in comics because if you don't know what you're setting up your shot for, you don't know how to pay it off in the end, Talking scenes, much like fight scenes, are really a matter of, when it's done like dynamically, are really a matter of it's like a 3-act structure, right? There's really a point, there's really a choreography to it similar to a fight scene.
I'm sorry I've gone quiet. I just looked up at your picture. I was feeling pretty good there. I love what you did with the leg, that foreground leg. And it's a
Cheat
little
leg, as I like to call it.
Unfortunately, I'm a little too committed, but I really like how that came out.
Thank you, man. This is the thing that my wife gives me grief for. This is exactly, if she were to walk in here just now and she's like, oh, you're just doing that formula. Which just goes to show you, she's like...
the same thing about Frazetta, couldn't you? You know, he's got his triangular composition formula. And you could call it formula, that's fine, but I think it does it a huge disservice.
She's so very unimpressed with me at this point, in as far as like what I do.
Yeah.
And by the way, and I don't know if you guys employ this or take the opportunity to do this for yourselves, but I'm a huge fan of just what's the most elegant way I can say this? But it's like, I'm a huge fan of like not caring. I was about to say not giving a shit, but like I'm a huge fan of like not caring about the oh gosh, not necessarily the end product, because I have a destination, right? And I would like it to be, I would like it to look a certain way by the time all is said and done. But I think for me, it's a mechanism that I developed so that I don't end up getting too fussy and being overly critical when it doesn't turn out to be exactly the picture in my head. Instead now, and I know this is weird, this is more sort of like less process and more like between the ears stuff, but I take the pass-fail out of the drawing and simply just enjoy the process of doing it, right?
How often are you able to do that while you're drawing? Is that something that you're pretty good at doing most of the time?
Enjoying the process.
Yeah, just enjoy and letting it go.
Yeah, I think when I struggle the most, like I don't know for you, but there's a trigger in my head where I go, I'm not enjoying this right now.
Oh yeah, no, I have that trigger. I just don't have a way out.
For me, I just pause, you know? I get out of the office. I get out of my... I just give my brain a break from trying to... Because I think what happens, and I don't know if this is the same for you, but I think drawing oftentimes is problem solving. It's not simply it's not just like, oh, here's the most effective line that I want to draw. It's more like, in order to get that effective line, I must do X, Y, and Z, 1, 2, and 3. And to me, it's problem solving, right? And when I get into a space in which I'm doing too much problem solving and I'm thinking about too much, like, oh, in order to do this gun, I've got to accommodate the trigger, I've got to accommodate, you know, blah, 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 rather than just doing. I know that I'm getting hung up on the nuts and bolts, as opposed to just the pure enjoyment of it. And when I feel that, I have to step away from the table and go give my brain a break from all the problem solving aspect of it.
You know, I think you probably actually save yourself quite a bit of time doing that, because I really struggle to get up. But there are times when, you know, bedtime will hit. I need to stop. I wake up in the morning, and something that I've thought for 3 hours is a 2-minute fix. And so,
Yes.
you know, that's advice I should really be taking.
Where do you think that comes from, David? In as far as like wanting to sort of like bear down and saying, hey, I'm going to solve this right now. And as far as your process is concerned.
You know, I don't know. I don't know that I have myself analyzed well enough to really give you a great answer for that.
Sure.
It's really difficult for me to let go. I have a hard time, for instance, moving from one picture to another before one's finished. I really need to get that finished before I can move on. And it's
really,
when an editor calls, something needs to be done, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But, wow, it's hard.
Wow. I mean, everybody has their process, and far be it for me to just like, hey, man, that doesn't, you know, you shouldn't do that. I'm just really fascinated when somebody's process is dramatically different from mine. How about yours, Eric? What kind of stuff do you go through where you're like, Do you have this similar hang-ups or similar like sort of processes as David does?
Sorry, what was the original question? Like you mean in terms of like, like, I'm always in fight or flight. Put it that way. I don't know if that's kind of what you're going for there.
I think that captures it. That captures it perfectly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one whole lump of course correction, just constantly. And I found with painting, it's like tenfold.
Is painting not forgiving?
It can be forgiving.
Yeah.
But it just requires such a different skill set. And that's really, I think it is forgiving. We just, you talk about letting go and just enjoying the process. Well, painting would be a great spot for us to both actually try and focus on that. I think that we've actually made a lot of strides with our painting. I'm very proud of it. But where we really struggle is just being able to let go, and it's too easy to look at all the incredible painters out there and just want to be there with every picture.
Oh, sure.
It almost looks like you're using some color because you've got that red underneath it. It just gives it a really nice, interesting contrast. I'd love how that
thank you.
works.
That's the most unintentional thing ever. But it does add a bit of interest to the original. Yeah, it bugs the heck out of me when I see it. But it seems to be an added value for those who are kind enough to commission these. So I'm happy that they like it. But I look at it sometimes and I'm like, oof, I should have been a little bit less heavy-handed with the pencil there, because again, it doesn't erase very well.
I'm just blown away by that, Eric. Feels like 10 minutes ago it was an underdrawing. Now it's fully realized. It's amazing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I wish I hadn't blobbed inked over here, but whatever. I'm over it.
It actually feels like it adds to it a bit there.
I'm trying to match some of the rendering that you're doing there. I'm trying to. This is a risky thing for me to do because I'm working with ink, and yes. I don't have the kind of understanding of, it's very difficult to completely pick up somebody's technique just straight out of the gate. And so,
oh, for sure.
But I'm trying.
Maybe I should have talked about it a bit more, eh?
Actually, I think that'd be great. Just the way that, like, you've got it on his forearm there a little bit. I think it's.
Oh yeah, this thing, right? This is an animation sheet. I call it like the Bruce Timm rendering for the underarm, right? Which is, you want to give an indication of striation without having to go into sort of a level of anatomic detail that really isn't all that necessary to communicate volume, right? It communicates anatomy, which are two very different concepts. Now, if you could do both, great. But for the most part, especially when you're storyboarding, especially if you're trying to just get as much of the stuff done as possible, you just need the appropriate amount of information to understand, oh, that's the bottom side of that volume, and therefore it communicates sort of like a cylindrical shape, right? And it's an implied anatomy as opposed to the actual, as opposed to the actual one. So I use it all the time, because I figured if that's what people are going to get hung up on with my drawing, then I don't think we're talking the same language, right? If they're like, oh, you don't know that, if somebody were to overly critique, oh, you don't know what that muscle looks like under his arm, in order to communicate whatever that muscle may be, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, we're, it's not that I was about to say that it's not that I'm not drawing for you, but I think we're getting hung up on two different things. And oftentimes when I speak to artists about that concept, I can pretty much hone in on where they are in their artistic journey, especially if it's like super early, right? Because again, it gives them it gives them comfort to understand that they understand the rule, as opposed to like me, where as I said earlier, like I don't care, like I'm moving on to the next thing, which is more of the holistic experience of the picture, the holistic execution of the picture.
Now, I'm not to disagree, but I'm going to just say as a counterpoint,
yes,
I think that your skill level is so high that you have so many things that you can fall back on. It does make it easier, and it does make it just easier to just go with it and have fun and not overly have to think it. Whereas an artist that, well, you know what? I guess I can't disagree, because you're saying an artist that is not as far along in their journey is just not going to see things that way. So, you know what? I agree. There you go.
So David and Eric, Steven Segovia is here, and he
right
says, he says, amazing skills. Thank you for sharing it, Eric.
Oh, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It's very, very kind of you.
Yeah, great to see Steven Segovia here. He's an incredible artist and
amazing artist. Yeah,
follow him on Instagram. Well, I've been following his work for years anyway, but yeah, we're honored to have you here. So thank you for coming by.
How you feeling there, Dave? How's it looking?
I'm not really dying to show anybody. I'll put it that way. I mean, I will if you insist, but you know.
This has been a delight. Just such a huge departure from how I normally approach things. So it's been absolute blast.
One of these days, I'm gonna have to pick your guys' brains. I mean, you know, we should, you know, in as much as you guys are doing a lot of learning by having me demo, I would love to be able to pick your brains when it comes to your processes, because those little things, and I was speaking to Eric about this offline, I often see this always learning mindset that I have, sort of like a trip to the salad bar when I meet other giving artists about their processes and their work, right? Like, maybe I don't use that thing one-to-one, yeah? But there's definitely something, I know there's something there that I can take away and somehow to like put into practice, right? And maybe even exercise enough and then put into practice when it comes to my next image. That's pretty exciting for me.
Yeah, it really is. And my biggest fear, and I don't know if this is something that's ever worried you, but I would see starting out that there were older artists. Some of them would just seemingly, they just get better and better over time.
Mm-hmm.
And other ones just see the fade.
Yes.
And I didn't really know, like, what is it that causes one artist to just start to fade, and what causes another artist to just keep growing. And
sure.
That's been an obsession of mine for so long, is trying to absolutely make sure that I'm actively trying to grow.
Yes. I think that's it. I think that you've sussed it out, which is, it's, you know, the artists who somehow either they actively find challenges for themselves, right? Similar to what you two are doing right now, which is, you know what you know, but you know for sure there are other things out there that you don't know, and you challenge yourself by saying, okay, well, what don't I know, and who can I reach out to, so that I get a chance to experience that, right? So
well, and it's the blessing of this YouTube channel to be able to have an excuse to bring an artist like you on and learn from you. You know, it wasn't really the intention when I started the channel, and
yeah,
it makes me so glad that I did. Of all of my reasons for wanting to start, and I had a few, none of them are anywhere near as valuable to me as being able to do this.
Right on. That's so cool to hear. So I often get asked, and I don't know, I think it may be the same for you, Dave, because I don't know of any artist who doesn't get asked that question of, like, what pen is that? Or what are the tools that you use? And again, I think there's value in that, because when you have an artist that you're really into, and you want to have them as a point of reference as far as, like, how are they executing that line. I was a big nerd for that kind. I still am, but back then even more so. I was a big nerd for that kind of stuff when it came to inking, because I was such a huge Kevin Nolan fan, right? Like I wanted to know exactly tools that Kevin Nolan used, because somehow I'd fooled myself into thinking that if I knew how to use those tools, I'd somehow be as proficient at them, or my drawings would look somewhere near the vicinity of a Kevin Nolan drawing, right? And rare is that ever true, just based on tools, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It is never true. But you can spend so much time. You can actually hurt yourself with bad tools. That's also
true. I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
So as much as I don't like to concentrate on that too much, really bad paper can hold you back. You know.
Oh, sure. For sure.
Make things
Yeah.
very difficult. So. Well, with that in mind, I'm using a Tombow Furinasuki. I don't know if that matters, but anyway, it is a brush pen. And Eric, you are Eric CANETE. You were using the same, but you were using the soft version. I use a hard. They come in hard and soft. I use a hard because I don't have a lot of hand control, and I just find it works better for my hand. You're using a soft because with the soft, with less pressure, you get a lot more play and a lot more interest in the line. I just find for me, I struggle with that. So
yeah, the variation in line for me, I think, is one of the better benefits of the softer. This is the green barrel. You're using a blue barrel one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When I want this line to bounce in the foreground leg, right, the left leg, I want that to be in the thickest, ugliest line that can then end up bouncing right back to a thinner, more delicate line, right?
Actually, that there is very interesting, Eric. So are you saying that, so with that balloon analogy that you had earlier, the part of the balloon that's like bulging, you're going to thicken that line?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. More often than not, it's going to bulge, like, again, as if the line weight itself, the mass is transferring to that.
That's a revelation for me too, because I'm always constantly thinking about where the light source is and placing the darkest line on the other side.
Yeah.
Well, that's my understanding of it. That's my only rule with it before.
This here is
No,
wow.
it doesn't make it. That rule is not wrong. As a matter of fact, if somebody were to ask me, hey, what's a good fundamental understanding of where thick and thin lines are applied, I would defer to that 100%, because it makes the most sense. It's trackable, right? But now we're talking about feel, right? It's harder to sort of like, hey, what is the 1, 2, 3s of feel, And I wouldn't recommend it as a starting off point. But if that's all you ever do is the thing that you guys are talking about, you're not going to go wrong with it. I'm a huge proponent of that.
Well, I just tried what you said, and it just works.
I just did the same thing, and it totally did. And I will never forget that.
Wow.
It's such what I'm drawing right now is so different for me. And I'm really enjoying it. Not just in terms of the proportion, but just in terms of the approach inking. Like, for instance, you have all of your detail across the stomach really pulling with the direction of his body against his hips. And I didn't have that at all. And I've kind of tried to fake it in just a little bit. But even my favorite version has a lot of energy that I didn't have before. And really,
it's maintaining. I think that's one of the key things that people call out in my work, and I'm very grateful for. It's incredibly humbling when they say, "Oh man, there's so much kinetic energy in the stuff that you do," and when I don't think about it, I'm often in that humbleness. I dismiss it immediately, so it doesn't go to my head, right? Like, oh, thank you, and then I think about something else, right? Just to keep myself as humble as possible. But if I really sit down and analyze it, it's that thing that you just identified right now, David, which is like, how can I convey in the inks the intent of all that motion that you and I were talking, everyone that we were all talking about an hour and a half ago? How do I continue to pay tribute to that in each stage of the drawing, right? And sometimes it's little details like that that really contribute to it.
So I feel like I'm basically in the same place in terms of finish where you are. It's not going to work, which is great because I didn't want to fall behind, but I find with painting a lot of times I get to a point actually where I want to stop even though I'm not thrilled with it, just because I just don't know what else to do. With this picture, I feel like I could do this for another few hours and still keep getting more out of it. And obviously we can't spend all night, but I think the most enjoyable thing about this entire thing for me so far is, and we're coming to the end, but has been, you talk about letting rules go and how important feel is, and how important just being willing to just push and let go of the rules. At the same time, I have learned so many great rules for being able to do this, and I think it's impossible to, if you have a really deep understanding of what you do in your craft, there are going to be rules that you can identify. Anyway, I've learned so much. So
brilliant. I'm so glad. I am so glad. It was one of my initial concerns when you guys invited me on. I was like, what can I possibly contribute to your guys' conversations, having tuned in, a dozen times or so, where I'm like, I don't know if there's anything in that space, right? Watching you draw, watching you sort of like take images to finish or halfway to a finish, and the next thing you know, you'll post it on your social media going like, I don't know how he'd finish that in the remaining 45 minutes of his stream, but there it is, So I was like, how do I contribute in that space? And I'm so glad to hear that you had a takeaway from having me on. So thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Dan Genovesi says, yes, this has been great. Alison McGlone says, most fun I've had for a while. Thank you, Eric. And Netherwood Park says, it seems you line weight for depth.
Yes.
And that to me sounds like a bit of a different way of putting what you were saying. So yes, line weighting for depth, especially for motion.
Yes, for motion primarily. Yeah. I mean, it's all of those things in concert, right? Like there's decisions that you make where you go, okay, I need to apply a line weight here because I know it needs to recede, so I'll be a little bit more on the with a little touch, right? But then there's times I'm just like, I'm gonna bear down on this pen so I can get the thickest, ugliest line out of it, just so I can make sure that the motion and the weight sells. And that's the other one, which is like weight transference,
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I don't know if I can do any more to this without without overworking it. Probably, and if this were a commission, I'd go in here with a white pencil, but I don't happen to have within arm's reach. But I think we're nearing the end of the stream. No?
Yeah, I brought out my white. You can talk. I've got a big one, so I can't get detail, which is probably for the best. But I'm using this really quickly right now to try and give me any advantage right now I can get, because I'm gonna have to hold my finger, and it's not gonna hold up to what you did there. But let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got here. Whoop, I lost my thing. So here's mine. This is what I've got.
That's so cool.
Dude. That is great.
Holy cow, that's great.
Well, thank you very much. I have had such an incredible time doing this. And what I was talking about, the lines on his stomach, not something I ever would have done, and it adds so much. And just the rendering in general, I really tried to follow what you're doing. I don't think I captured it perfectly. Doing that in one session is almost impossible, but I really like how it came out, even though I was kind of messy with it. There were so many things,
man.
That's aside from just the drawing itself, what I got out of that. So yeah,
that's
I'm
great.
very, very happy.
Brilliant.
And I put in a little white because I thought,
I'm into it. I'm into it.
All right, so here's Eric.
I found myself staring way too much, but yeah, I've learned a ton.
Dude, principles are there, man.
Yeah,
I love that.
I started with like C8 over here.
I know it. Like, I love that little part of that thigh, that right thigh, that kind of like picks up the light. You know, that is so good. I would strive for that in a lot. Like, if I were thinking more about like slowing down and going like, how do I really want to affect this piece? That little light part of that thigh is brilliant. Well done.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
I'm just blown away by the entire stream. I'm going to rewatch this at the time. There's just so much so much information packed in here, and it's all been exceptionally
thank you both.
helpful.
Yeah, it really, really has been. This has been. I knew this would be great. I've been a fan of your work for a long time, an enormous fan, and I met you quickly,
Yes.
but and also you have streams too on Twitch. I don't know if that's something that you're
not recently, not for a while now. I think I'm going to start doing. I mean, I'm going to start streaming on YouTube fairly soon. I finally have managed to be able to come out from being submerged with the work and work on top of that. So very soon I'm going to start streaming. And if you don't mind me, I'm here on YouTube on under Erick CANETE, and you're going to be able to. If you subscribe there, you'll be able to be notified on when I start streaming live. So,
all right, great.
Show up.
Yeah, so definitely. Russ Hicks just put up. Check out Erick CANETE's website and Instagram here. So we've got your website, ericcanete.com, Instagram .com/Erick CANETE, and also YouTube. And this has been so much better than I thought it would be, and I thought it would be great. So thank you so much, Erick, for coming and doing this. Hopefully we can have
Thank you.
I have to say, I'd like to do exactly what we did this time again, but we'll have to talk about it. But hopefully we can get you again.
That would be awesome. That'd be awesome. I'd show in a heartbeat.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It looks like we basically just hit the 2-hour mark. So that was perfect. Could not have planned it better. I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next Tuesday for another stream. It's going to be tough to match this one, but I'm sure it'll be great. And thanks everybody. I'm the worst, Erick, with these kinds of
You're brilliant.
To take over. So
yeah, thanks so much, Erick, for joining us. This has been an absolute treat, and thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
We're gonna have to do this the other way next time, though. I'm gonna pick your guys' brain.
All right, yeah, let's do it. Actually, I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Sounds good.
Sure, for sure.
We have a super chat from Greg L. He says, I have trouble physically placing characters and poses. Any resources that teach how to manipulate anatomy and exaggerated positions? Now, I'm just going to quickly throw out Hogarth. Burn Hogarth is very, very exaggerated. It's not an influence for me, truthfully, but as far as like a real drawing resource. So, Erick, do you have something to recommend?
I think I'm on that same line, and if you can go find that, I spoke about it earlier in the stream. A fellow by the name of Michael Matesi has published a couple of books called Force, and those if you can wrap your mind around mathematically what he's talking about, it's really dense. It's really sort of like it dives deep. But if you can glean something off of that, you'll get a ton of dynamism injected into your work.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much. So on behalf of all of us, good night, and we'll end it there. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great week, everyone.
See you guys.